challenges, your problems. But from your presentation, we can see that you have the same worries that we have. You have the same concerns that we have. And therefore, only collaboration is the way to go, you know. So thank you so very much. I would like to pose the first question to you, Sarah. Alex has given us his perspective as a law enforcement officer, telling us why he thinks this partnership is important. So I would like to get the feedback from you as a private operator. Why do you think this public partnership is important in the fight against, whether it's money laundering, whether it's financing of terrorism, or even proliferation financing, as the case might be?
Thank you very much. Working?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was really exciting to hear you talk, Alex, because all the things you're saying is exactly what we're trying to work towards. So, as you say, Nick, we are a private organisation, but working across the ecosystem. So, in the UK, where I live, I think it's UK Finance that said £22,000 an hour is spent on fighting financial crime. And that's not even dealing, with the dirty money. It's just trying to prevent it. So there's changes to the economic crime bill about to go through, which will make huge advances in terms of data sharing. But the question is how? How does everyone work together? There's so many parties involved, and so they're recommending a whole system approach. And I really like what you said, Alex, in terms of the multifaceted approach as well. And I think, so I go to many conferences, I speak, and many panels end on the only way we're going to solve this is collaboration. And I feel everyone wants to collaborate, but the bigger question is how. And from where, I'm standing, working with RegTechs and firms and regulators and trade associations, I think one of the biggest problems is how does everyone advance their own agendas and succeed whilst achieving this collective response and outcome. And with financial crime, economic crime, fraud, whatever label you use, it's really critical. It's a matter of national security and international, and it does impede growth. But I think the problem is culture. So, trust was cited at the 2008 financial crisis as the biggest driver to that collapse. And we're, 15 years on, and I don't feel the financial services industry has really moved forward. So in terms of private-public partnerships and collaboration, that's the barrier we need to overcome. And I'm really thrilled to be here, and Cyril has been a great supporter of this topic. And I asked him for a quote in terms of collaboration, and he talked about RegTech enabling trust, establishing and enabling. And that's what I'm really excited to be here, talking about, and hopefully strengthening relationships. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so very much, Sarah. So if, listening to what you've said, everybody knows what to do, right? The challenge usually is how do we do it? What are the, basic steps that we can take? I don't know if you would like to elaborate a little bit more on that for some of our delegates or participants. What are those steps that they can actually take in trying to put these things into practice?
Yeah, so it's interesting when we talk. So I think people is the biggest thing, and we, as well as private-public partnerships, which is gaining real momentum. And I'm excited about that. But what we need as well is really practical ways to collaborate. So regulators and other bodies have been great at putting on tech sprints and innovation labs and conferences. All of that is really important. But I feel we're at the stage now where we need to move forward and look towards longer term adoption, real proof points with the firms. Okay, so a lot of this innovation and technology work, they don't even know about, and it's not going to reach them. And they're the people that need these tools, and they need better control frameworks working with the tools. They need more capability. So I think it's that next level down, and data is the other topic that really needs focus. So whether we're talking about technology or AI, it all comes back to data. And I feel we're, as an industry, very immature around data, and ESG is another example where it all comes back down to the data, and we're hampered in progress because of data issues. So I think we need those capabilities that several speakers have talked about yesterday and today, and it needs that collaboration, across all parties. So yeah, we need more practical ways of working together, and to actually start building some of this stuff that everyone can benefit from. I think one of the challenges with trying to be global is there's a number of businesses and parties trying to be global, but it's not possible because look at Africa, it's so huge and has such as different needs and things to offer to other regions. So it needs the individual, the local, but also the global come together. So I don't know, does that...
I think I get what you're trying to say. So it's not a one approach fits all. So there's the need to be global. There's also the need to be local, because there are certain challenges that are very peculiar to us as Africa. And then what we want to achieve is something that is a global issue. That's so right. We have to find a way to make that work.
That's right. Yeah. And also it needs, real practical examples, and it needs a convener as well. Okay. So it needs some sort of independent curation. So you can't combine a global effort. It won't just happen on its own. So you need some sort of independent party that has representation. So I think let's call it PPP, because I keep getting tongue-tied. You need that, but you also need a body of people with the right technology tools and data and frameworks. And I believe some of that needs to be open source, to drive down the costs and also encourage adoption. Yeah, so these are some examples, I think, of things that we'll see over the next year or so that will really help advance collaboration.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. Rachel, I will come to you. When Sarah was speaking, she mentioned the artificial intelligence. That's another buzzword. Everybody's talking about artificial intelligence. You're talking about machine learning. And I believe the question I want to ask is that the right thing for Africa as an emerging market now? Or are there certain things that we probably need to put in place first before we begin to go to the big words and the big issues? So, Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think to some degree we almost need to start at the basics with technology. So yes, we can get caught up with artificial intelligence, with large language models and so on. And they're really cool things to talk about and think about how we can apply them in the financial services sector. But I think we also need to start with the perspective of what is it that we're trying to do, instead of jumping into using the latest technology just because it's there or because it's exciting. I do some lecturing with the FinTech and RegTech course, and I think what's really needed in almost every jurisdiction globally is increased awareness and the availability of educational resources to actually be able to use technology in a responsible and logical way. So instead of just using technology for the sake of technology, we should be figuring out how we can apply it, and in particularly in the context of anti-financial crime. One of the things, I guess, that the financial services sector is, and indeed the wider industry in terms of the regulatory bodies, legislators and so on, is that we are unfortunately limited by things like data privacy and the ability to share intelligence and information and so on. Unfortunately, criminal actors and criminal organizations are not limited by those restrictions. And so they're already gaining pace with the use of technology. And so therefore, if we want to be, at the position where we can actually detect and prevent financial crime, then we need to be as educated, as smart, and as enabled through technology as they are. And so I think, finding ways to actually embrace technology, but in that, incremental way, as opposed to saying, let's just deploy artificial intelligence or let's use large language models, without really thinking about the opportunities and challenges that exist within those capabilities.
So thank you so much. You mentioned something about the technology. So I guess I will be asking Prosper now, taking off from what Rachel had said. So what are some of the, how will I say it now? What are some of the responsible ways that we can use technology, right? Rachel had mentioned about not just diving into it because it's available, because everybody's talking about it. So what are the ways that we can use this technology that is obviously available, but in a responsible manner?
Well, thank you very much, Neka. Although I may also have had some issues based on my fellow panelists' contribution, but first, let me answer your question, and then I'll come back to that if you allow me to do so. Let me say that, yeah, as we all know, technology is a double-edged sword. So it cuts both ways, and it can also have a negative implication in as much as it is also quite one of the modern weapons we can use against financial crimes. The main challenge that I've seen so far in practice is the issue of data protection. So the issue of data protection has been an important issue when it comes to fighting crime using some of the latest techs that have been developed. They have a specific term for that. But we also need to make sure that we respect issues to do with data protection, but also human rights in general, even human rights of those accused of committing crimes, that is the bad guys. I think this is all I can say in a nutshell, but and allow me, please, to come back to this, because I understand our theme is really on public partnerships, and that I wanted to add that, in this, well, there are so many players, in the field, and it's important that they create alliances. Otherwise, we end up having duplication of ideas and wastage of resources. I've seen this with many countries that have several organizations basically working on the same area, one reporting directly to the president, another reporting to the DG, another reporting to so forth and so on. So it's important that they create alliances so that they benefit from the economics of scale. And more importantly, when it comes to the definition of public institutions, we need also to expand this definition so that we include all those other players who may be traditionally viewed maybe as non-public institutions, but they are offering public services. I'll give an example of the African Anti-Money Laundering Institution, an organization which I founded. We are not driven by any profit, ideas to make profits. So our aim is to deliver those services that have been shunned by, those who are mainly driven by, who are profit-oriented. So it's important that when it comes to the definition of who is public or who is in the public sector, we expand this definition in a noble way that will help us to fight crimes. Thank you, Nega.
Thank you so much, Prosper. And one key word I heard you say is alliances, right? Nobody can do it alone, like we've all been saying. And in my experience dealing with financial crimes, one thing I've seen is that once there's a gap in a system, in a process, the financial criminals somehow share that information amongst themselves. They are not limited by, okay, this is group A or that's group B. Somehow they find a way to take advantage of that loophole or that weakness. They don't really have the safeguards that we, the operators, seem to have. So I guess this question I will ask you, Alex, as a law enforcement officer. Criminals really do not seem to be limited by some of the things that we are limited by. So if you're doing your investigation, you have to take into consideration data privacy laws, things like that. They don't have those considerations. So what then do you think, or how do you think that as law enforcement, you can walk around these limitations to still be able to do what you need to do to address these challenges?
Thank you, Neka. It's a huge issue, actually. We see it as working in silos. You see this, for instance, law enforcement, in that cubicle, some others thinking that the EFCC is a lion from the outside. So as long as we keep seeing ourselves from this divergent view of distrust, of non-cooperation, that problem will continue. So part of what the law enforcement or like the EFCC is doing is coming out of its shell like we're doing. You see, I'm just a normal person. So you come out of your shell, interact with people. Part of what we do, if you might understand, is that we take this campaign even to schools, to cradle up until tertiary institution, even post that. You see us everywhere at orientation camps to demystify the EFCC. Recently, I was at one of the financial institutions invited us for providing education for their new intakes, and for me it was a beautiful thing. I was there to provide them the view before they get into the industry. What is your view of law enforcement? A lot of them were scared. However, we told them whatever actions we're carrying out is for the benefit of the entire nation. So if you are on the side of the law, you have no problems. But if you are against the law, that's where you have, or you cross the line, that's where you have issues. So the solution, again, is what we're doing, bringing the campaign to the people, making them understand that it's a holistic, benefit, that the actions of law enforcement are seen to be carried out in that light. So that's what we think.
Okay, thank you so much. At least we've seen one or two practical ways from a law enforcement perspective how we can begin to end that trust from the operator. So maybe I would ask Rachel, from a private perspective, when I say private, I mean non-governmental, what are some of the ways that we can begin to break down those walls and begin to build the relevant trust that would help us collaborate in fighting this money laundering and terrorist financing?
Sure. So I think, and this ties in with actually how we can potentially be, pushing the boundaries with technology and how we can actually start to implement certain capabilities whilst also maintaining that, I suppose, that compliance with the obligations that we're set to. If you think about the process of identifying, suspicious transactions, for example, and then being able to provide actionable intelligence to law enforcement, right now that process is heavily manual. We have lots of people across financial institutions across the globe that are, manually looking at indicators, manually looking at transaction patterns, and then ultimately having to put that all into a story that then goes to the financial intelligence unit that they're required to report their suspicions to. And then once it moves to the FIU, they then have to go through all of those reports independently and manually as well. They have to make their own decision and ultimately take the next steps on whether to pursue prosecution or criminal conviction and so on. So if you think that, as Alex mentioned, right now we're working in silos. So every single bank has its own department where it works on these cases, and then all of those reports are routed up into the FIU, but also so are the bank next door and the bank next door to that. When actually, if you think about it, any, and this is not a piece of advice, but any criminal is probably going to have, a diverse set of financial services that they're using so that they can monetize quicker or monopolize quicker. So the ability for law enforcement in particular to be able to see what's going on holistically across all of the financial institutions that it monitors, for example, but also for each bank to be able to understand potentially where another bank has identified risks that they should also be aware of. And there's some practical limitations that exist right now, not only the ability to understand what is happening outside of our bank, but even within any given bank, we're also subject to restrictions or operational challenges, such as having to manually apply our logic and consideration to these scenarios. I think one of the ways that we could potentially improve that is looking at opportunities to combine intelligence. So not necessarily sharing data, or certainly not only sharing data, but where the risk is significant enough or where there's a justification for us to be able to collaborate more broadly outside of one institution, then perhaps we can do that better. And by applying some technical capabilities, we can also do that a lot quicker as well. That could be data analysis. which can be by any individual bank, but also then sharing that intelligence with law enforcement. And then also from a law enforcement perspective, being able to take all of that information from each of the banks that it's working with and having an ability to make quicker judgments or quicker assessments because we're now working from the same perspective. Hopefully that gives some insight to the private sector.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel. And I believe in a lot of countries, you actually have the compliance officers of the banks forming associations where they share these issues, address some of these concerns, where they are more or less bringing their own table and saying to the regulators, the law enforcement, come, let's reason together and solve this problem. So very valid points that you have made there. I think the next question I would ask of Prosper and Alex, right? So they say knowledge is power, and being a financial institution in an emerging country, in an emerging country in Africa, of course, what are some of the key money laundering techniques that we all need to be aware of to help us in building an effective compliance risk management program within our respective organizations? Are there some techniques some things that we need to look out for, some things that we need to be mindful of, as operators?
Prosper first or myself?
Alex first,
all right,
and then
good.
Prosper.
So the key indicators, key things to look out for. Very importantly, if you identify the problem, you'll be able to, tackle bring solutions to it. If you look at the crypto experience, as it were, in Nigeria, for instance, we haven't been able to maximize its potential. There are still regulations, haven't been a regulation about it. So, but this part of what I think one of the other speakers said is technology, you actually can't control its flow. Sometimes you also can't define or create a boundary around about it. So technology flows, and once people begin to appreciate it, it grows. The crypto space is flowing, and people are appreciating it, and it's taking over. The point here is, if we are seeing this, what should be the response of the, say the government or regulators, is to provide regulation around it, because you really can't fully stop it. So one of the things is, if you identify the problem, then you begin to provide regulation around it, bring awareness to the people, talk about its gains, its challenges, its losses, talk about, so talking about it too is another strategy to deploy. And then thirdly, just like Prosper said, technology is a double-edged sword. There are its gains, there are its challenges, its losses. So then you begin to mitigate. So partnering, strategizing with people who are in the industry, the academia that do lots of researches around that area, and all of that, you begin to harness your strengths, and then you see that even the challenges are not as much. So one, if you identify the problem, then you begin to bring regulation around it, and then talking about it, synergizing, you'll be able to bring solutions to its challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Prosper, do you have any key trends that you think can help the operators?
That's a very hard one, but what I can say is, I don't know, NECA, fellow panelists and listeners, if you have been in the army or you have done national service, you know something that's called a moving target. So it changes velocity and height at the same time. So it changes speed, it changes height. You are trying to hit that moving target. And this is the same, the same concept applies when it comes to different trends and typologies of money laundering. Crooks are very smart. So they combine these even old techniques. The old Hawala system can be combined with the latest technology to make it more sophisticated and create, an illusion that will make regulators make it very difficult to detect. And so we cannot really say we pin down this particular trend. We should always be aware that they mutate. These different trends, they are adapted to suit a particular environment. In Africa, crooked people are not inventing new methods as such. They are adopting just different methods. The black market peso that was invented by drug dealers in South America is now being used in dollarized economies of Southern Africa, in those monetary unions in Central Africa and some parts of ECOWAS that uses the CEFA. So you see that they combine these old methods with new trends, new methods, new technologies, for example. And perhaps that's why it's important that we embrace also technology so that we counter these mutated forms of or trends of money laundering in the region. So basically, this is what I have to say.
Thank you, Prosper. You've just told us that no matter what we do today, the problem is changing, right? It's a moving target. We can never say that we fully solved the problem of money laundering. So we just have to keep learning and adapting and addressing the challenges as they come. I don't know how much longer we have. And I don't know if anybody has a question from the audience. Okay. Our moderator has disappeared. Okay. The gentleman at the back, can you ask your question, please? How much longer do we have?
Just take some of the questions.
Okay.
All right. So we can put that all together.
Good morning.
Hi.
Yes. I've heard your takes, Rachel's takes on what she talked about. Before we use technology, we do really need to understand or create awareness of money laundering and terrorist finance topologies. Prosper also talked about technology being a double-edged sword, which I agree, and also data protection as a setback in the fight for fraud. And Alex also pointed out that the campaigns in schools, the awareness creation to people as well. So my question is actually on to throw more light, maybe to Alex, to throw more light on the last stage of fighting financial crime, which I believe is asset recovery. What is the process by which these proceeds of crimes that are identified, traced, seized, confiscated, and therefore are supposed to be, in quotes, returned to the rightful owners? What are you guys doing about that final stage of fighting crime?
Thank you. So what's the name, please?
Yes, Robinson.
Robinson.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You know, we actually can exhaust all that we can within this short time. But to Robinson's question, which is very important, the thing that the criminals fear the most is that if you fleece them of every asset they acquire in the course of the entire venture of committing a crime. So in 2022, there was a passage of the Poker Act as the proceed of crime, an Assets Recovery Act 2022. That has been able to allow for the process. In it is described the process of, confiscation and then management of these assets. 2022 too, for the EFCC, was the first time we started, having issues of recovering crypto assets. And then, so in the Poker Act, it describes whose role it is for the law enforcement, for instance, when the individual is arrested. If it's the normal fiat, we get, court orders. If the loss is to an individual, the individual gets restituted upon conclusion of the trial, and then judgment. And in the event of proceed of cryptos, they're also seen as virtual assets. They're also seen as assets. They could be monetized and then restituted to the victim party. If it's to the government, then it is returned to the Confederation account. So the Poker Act, which is a new innovation for us in Nigeria, has solved the problem you're talking about. But before then, that was a huge problem in terms of creating a legal framework around it. So at the moment, the Poker Act has brought the solution to the legal framework and then to its proper, appropriation of proceeds of crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Any other? Yes, please.
Good morning. My name is Hawa Ogombo from the Nigeria Deposit Insurance Corporation. I'm very interested in this issue of collaboration and how to really get regulators together to share data, and most importantly, something that Sarah said, the how to advance our own agendas in order to achieve collective achievements. In Nigeria, we have the Financial Services Regulation Coordinating Committee, of which EFCC is a member, NDIC, the police and SEC and other regulators. I want to just get a feel from the panel. It seems like there's a gap between, yes, we are all aware about this collaboration, but there doesn't seem to be, even with the establishment of this committee, there doesn't seem to be a strong, deliberate strategy. I just want to get a feel from members of the panel, especially Alex, what you think is the way forward. Technology is running faster than regulation all the time. We can sit in this conference and deliberate as much as we can, but if we don't have the political will and the overview to see how far these networks affect every sector of the financial system, economic financial crimes, it affects the banking sector, it affects investment, it affects so many other things, and yet regulators have their own little jurisdictions. So it's a real net that we're trying to untangle. How do we even start doing that? That's just what has been on my mind.
Thank you so much. Sorry,
Inika, I think we might have to use that to wrap up the session because we have two major stuff to go in. I was hoping that the whole conference was just going to dwell on this, but apparently we will have to entertain some other ones. So in the next few minutes, we want to wrap up. Thank you.
All right, we'll quickly wrap up. So I think just before Alex begins to speak, I understand what you're saying, and you are a regulator, so you don't even feel the pain of that inability to come together, because at the end of the day, when the two elephants are fighting, it's the grass that is suffering. So it's the operators that are bearing the brunt of that, thing. I think one of the things that regulators, law enforcement need to do is, they say, if you want to catch a thief, you need to think like a thief, right? I think that in terms of technology, we need to update ourselves to understand the way these technologies work. You cannot mitigate a risk that you do not understand. So the first thing is to understand the business. You can send, if you're regulating a fintech, right? You can send your staff members to a proper fintech to see how it works, see their products, see their services. And then with your regulator mindset, you can then begin to see the risks in those things that the business is not seeing. So I believe sort of stepping into our shoes would help a little bit more. But that's just me saying. Okay, you want to go first before Alex? Oh, everybody wants to speak. So, Sarah, Alex, go first, and then Sarah, and Prosper, and we round up.
Okay, so I think from my perspective, if you pick a case study, a particular issue, at stake, and then you bring everybody on board to be able to provide their perspective, that's also one way to achieving, this synergy. We'll always be speaking a lot of grammar until you have a particular case to work on. So when you have a particular case to work on, if I have a case that I need to reach out to the NDIC, I'll say, okay, this is a case study. So let's work on it. Let's see how cooperative you are. So by then we'll begin to measure each other's cooperation. So we've done that with some of our counterparts, sorry, and it's working. So I think it's also a tool by which we can achieve this. That's one of the how of achieving collaboration. Thank you.
All right, Sarah.
Is that working? Right. Think like a thief. Obviously not too far, but but I think it leads on to a point about mindset. So a lot of people talk about what's the regulator, government, and so on, but they can't provide all the answers or the doing. So I think this is an individual as well as collective call to action. There's a real urgency, and I would just say as well about the techs. Okay, so RegTechs. I think everyone's a bit guilty of loving what they do so much and almost forgetting that urgency. And with technology, I think if you are a technologist, and I am one myself, many years ago I did a computer science degree, but you think it's simple. But if you're a compliance officer or regulator that hasn't had that exposure to technology, then it's not. And I think we need to think about tech for good, responsible, sustainable technology. So if you can't really justify a feature, don't build it, because it's just going to add on cost and complexity. And the next problem from when RegTech is adopted is, how do the regulators regulate it, if they ever do, or how is it supervised? So we need standards. But I think, yeah, there's a call to action for all of us. And the case studies is absolutely spot on. We need specifics. It's easy to get overwhelmed with the scale of this problem, but we need to be specific and then grow from there. And it doesn't need to cost the earth. Collaboration, needs to be simple. Yeah, that's my point.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Prosper in 1 minute, please.
Okay, 2 points. So first one, criminals will always be ahead of us. So this is something we need to be clear about. The only thing that we should fight to do is to reduce the gap. Because whereas criminals may be already in the 21st century, some of our regulators are in the dark ages, or the Stone Age. So we need to try to reduce that gap. But otherwise, criminals are always a step ahead. If we think that we can be ahead of criminals, that can affect our psyche, and eventually we'll lose the interest in fighting crime. Second, the issue of collaboration is already part of the Financial Action Task Force recommendations that have been supported by the United Nations Security Council resolutions, and it is law in many states as far as I know. We should now try to see how we, instead of just looking at the political will, we build people's will to make our policymakers, our politicians accountable in terms of how they are implementing the Financial Action Task Force recommendation, including that one that promotes collaboration. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Prosper. I'm so sorry we're out of time. But in concluding, Rachel, we've spoken so much about collaboration, but we know that when we're all at a sit-down table, the bigger guys usually have the louder voices. So how can we make sure that this collaboration moves the industry forward and not just the few of the big guys in the industry?
Sure, and I think that comes down to trust, and it's also one of the potential barriers for growth and innovation, because we've seen that in other contexts across the financial services industry. The banks with the most money are the ones who are doing better because they can apply new technologies, they can hire more people, they result in more customers. I think whatever we do in terms of a next step, and my call to action, I guess, for everybody in this conversation will be, to Alex's point, find the use case, but then actually let's go a step further. Let's create a safe space where we can test some of those ideas, whether they be technology or regulatory or other constructs. But in terms of the outcome, we need to make sure that those learnings and gains are evenly distributed, so that we're not leaving any particular part of the financial services industry behind.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, Prosper. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, myself.
Please put your hands together for Ineka. We are thanking you so much. I would like you all to please thankfully stand so that we can take a group picture. I would like to invite the CEO, Mr. Cyril, to please come up to join them quickly. Photographer, where are you guys? Shala? All right. So that we have this quickly done. The next is going to be a presentation that we are going to be having on behalf of AMG Super App and Product Showcase is the title. As soon as they're done with this photograph, we'll go in with it. Want to say a big thank you to 9PSB, 9 Payment Service Bank, for your support. May1, thank you. UP, Pay Attitude, MTN, EMG, Imeldo. We say a big thank you to FITC. Thank you very much. NCC, NDIC, CBN, SEC, NITDAN. Want to say a big thank you for your support. KPMG, of course, Deep Ecosystems, Cool Minor, as well as RegTech Revolution, and then GVG, Global Voice Group. Thank you very much. Quad Switch, we say a big thank you as well. And this panel obviously has been wonderful. Prosper, thank you as you join us. Continue on this. You continue with us online. That is going to help us still go on. This is the case might be, so to speak. Well, ladies and gentlemen, after this product showcase, I'm excited that we're going to be dealing with the mobile money and agency banking. I understand that my speakers are already in the house. Some of them are joining us online. But at this point in time, help me as I ask that we put our hands together for the CEO email the group, Mr. Mark Bastryski, as he comes up to make this product presentation. Please put your hands together for him. Then after the next session, we will go in for one last presentation.